Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. I'm Bad as a Fish, and today we're going to do a deep dive into the Outlander Tech mechanic. Now, this is a video that's been requested a lot by new players and experienced players alike. So today we're going to have a look at what is Outlander Tech, we're going to figure out how to earn Outlander Tech, and how to spend it. Now, a little bit of history, go back a few years. The Outlander faction was not a faction that the developers really liked. And in fact, they had decided to not add any more Outlander cards and potentially phase out the Outlander faction. But the community, the Outlanders were one of the community's favourites. So the devs did a complete 180, and instead of kind of phasing out the Outlanders, back in February of 2001, we had the Outlandish Operations patch, and that was where we had some new Outlander cards added, and that is where the Outlander Tech mechanic came in. Now, the mechanic and the rates at which you earn tech and stuff like that have changed a little bit a few times, balance-wise, some of the cards as well, over the months and years. But as a general concept, the way the mechanic works is pretty much the same. So today we're going to have a look at that and hopefully answer any questions that you may have, and give you an idea of how you build a deck around this Outlander Tech. And just as a little aside, interestingly, before it was named Tech, internally it was called Scrap. So if you ever see Scrap mentioned somewhere by a developer or an old patch note or an older player, that's where the Scrap comes from. And that maybe give you an idea of why it's called the Scrap Yard. But anyway, it was originally going to be called Scrap, but then it was renamed to Tech. But let's find out how we earn it. Okay, so what I thought we would do is have a look at the Outlander cards, explain how you earn tech, explain how you spend the tech, and then we'll have a look at some examples of it in action. So very quickly, just how do we earn tech? Well, tech is effectively a currency that you use in the game. You earn it, you build up an amount, and then you can spend it in certain different ways. So you earn it by drawing an Outlander card. Now, drawing is when a card moves from your 5th card into your 4-hand deck. Your 4-card hand. Now, don't be confused with playing the card. Drawing is when it enters your hand. Playing is something different. Okay, so when an Outlander card, any Outlander faction card, when it's drawn into your 4-card hand, it generates tech at the rate of 5 tech per mana. So, for example, if you draw a 4 mana Outlander card, then that's going to give you 20 tech. And this is a balance that goes on. So as the game goes on, you'll see you're earning tech, you're spending tech, and you'll always have some sort of a balance. Could be 0, could be up to the maximum of 200. And as we'll see in just a little bit when we have a look at the example, there's a little icon above your hand that shows you your current balance. Now, that icon will only be there if you have some kind of tech-enabled card, i.e. if you have some way to spend the tech. So if we just type tech, then hopefully this will give us all of the cards that have a tech-enabled mechanic. So we've talked about how you earn the tech. How do you spend it? Well, spending it is pretty straightforward. It's automatic, assuming you have enough tech. So let's have a look at the first example, the stint. So the stint here has an Outlander Tech mechanic. So if you have 75 tech, when you play this card, it will automatically claim the furthest bridge and consume that 75 tech. Now, one thing to note here is if you already have that furthest bridge, then it won't consume the tech because it hasn't effectively done anything. If you don't have the 75 tech, then it won't trigger this tech effect. So automatic as long as you've got enough. And so it's important to pay attention to the cards and their tech consumption. And what you should see, if you have enough tech to trigger a card, it will have the yellow border around it in your hand. And that gives you an immediate indication of whether it's ready to be enabled or not. Okay, so the first example there of a tech based card with a tech trigger is the stint. And as we'll see, different cards have different amount of tech requirements, and this is kind of another knob that developers can use to balance these abilities. Right, so next up we have the Simulacrum. So the Simulacrum will copy a non-mythic minion from your opponent's hand, and it has the tech trigger if you have enough tech, which is in this case 40. When you spawn the card, then it will give haste to whatever you've copied. Remember, it costs 2 mana if it doesn't copy anything, i.e. there's no non-mythic minions. So that means there's either only mythic minions in your opponent's hand, or a combination of mythic minions, spells, and buildings or abilities. So it's 2 mana, which will only give you just 1 marine, or if there is something for it to copy, it will be the regular cost of the unit, but you do have this 40 tech trigger to give whatever you copy haste. Next up we have the Wrecked Walker. So this is a little guy who will ignore minions and just walk across the bridge. So he's quite a premium in the current meta with the way the bridges are now. And his tech mechanic is spend 30 tech to summon 2 gnats. Of course, gnats are the small flying ranged minions that will support it. So he can go from non-trigger, just a walk-in kind of small health pool that can grab a bridge, to something that can actually kill things. Right, next up we have the Ion Grenade. So the way the Ion Grenade works is it will consume tech, and the more tech it consumes, the more damage it will do. So non-activated, it will just do 50 damage. For each 25 tech available, and it will consume as much as it can up to the maximum, so for each 25 tech available, it will explode an extra time. Each time for 50. So that's 1 plus a potential extra 3. So overall, 200 damage that it can do. And it will consume up to 75 tech. Again, if it's available. If there's less than 75 tech available, so you've only got 50, then it'll explode an extra 2 times. So that's the Ion Grenade. Next up we have the TAS. Of course, this is the building that gives you the Hellfire ability, but it also has the Outlander Tech mechanic where if you've got 30 tech, when you spawn this, it will have these 2 gnats, as you can see illustrated here, that will support it. Next up we have the Scrapyard. So the Scrapyard is kind of the Outlander version of a production building. But rather than just producing the same unit over and over again, it will produce a random minion. So it will consume tech, and what it will do is every 5 seconds it will summon a random 2 to 5 mana ground only Outlander minion, and it will spend 13 tech per mana of the card. So if you're spawning a 4 mana Outlander card, then it's going to be 4 times 13, which is 52 tech. And it will keep spitting those out. What you'll probably also notice is sometimes you get 1 marine that comes out. How is that possible? Well, that's the Simulacrum. The Simulacrum, if it's randomly chosen to be the thing the Scrapyard is going to spawn, then it will always give you that 1 marine, which is not great. Potential change in the upcoming patch. We might see the mana range increase from 2 to 5 to 2 to 6. So I think that means you could also get the Siegebreaker from the Scrapyard. Unconfirmed at the moment, though. Okay, so that's the way the Scrapyard works. There's been quite some confusion over the Scrapyard because it did change a lot over the year or so that it's been available. It used to consume all your tech and then like give it back to you, but now it's quite straightforward. It just summons a random minion and consumes tech based on how expensive it was. Right, next up is one of my favourite cards, I think, the Aimbot. And this is an interesting one because not only does it have 1 tech trigger, it has 2 tech triggers. So the Aimbot will start with a shield regardless. Now, when you spawn it, if you've got 30 tech available, it will consume that and gain marksmanship, which of course is the extra +2 range. And you see this white symbol underneath. This is the marksmanship symbol. So if you see a unit with that, you know it's got marksmanship from something, whether that be the Aimbot buff in itself, whether that be Stormbringer, whether that be armored escort, whatever. But if you see this symbol, uh, that's what that means. Okay, so 30 tech gives it marksmanship. And then if you have 30 more tech, it will summon 2 gnats to support it. And those gnats will also have marksmanship. So basically there's 3 states that it can spawn in. Either just the standard state with a shield, the first trigger state if you've got 30 tech, so where it gets the extra range, and then the fully triggered state with 60 tech, where you get the extra range and the gnats. So fully triggered, that is a really strong unit that can deal with a lot of different threats, whether that be one big unit or lots of little units. And then finally we have the Razor Squadron. Now the Razor Squadron, again, it has a tech mechanic, but it's slightly different to how the other one works, because these basically consume tech all the time they're alive. So you can see there, pay 5 tech per second. If you can't pay 5 tech per second, i.e. you've run out of tech, then these will start losing health. So the thing about the Razor Squadron is they will consume a lot of tech very quickly. So you need to keep that in mind when you're thinking about building your tech decks. So that's the Razor Squadron. There's also some kind of weird interaction with Piloted, where Piloted costs you 1 tech every time it triggers. I don't know if it's a bug. I'm not really sure. It's just something that happens. If anyone knows any more, be sure to let us know. Okay, so those are the cards that have the tech mechanics. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can earn it and how you can consume it. So what do we consider when we're building a deck around tech-based stuff? Well, there's a few things we need to consider. Firstly, we need to consider what sort of amount of tech are we going to be generating per cycle. We know we get 5 tech per mana, so we can look at a proposed deck and get an idea of how much tech we're generating per cycle. Then we also want to think about how much tech are we consuming per cycle. Because obviously if we want to consume more than we're producing, then we're not going to be able to meet those needs. And if we're consuming less, then potentially we're not getting the most value out of it. The other thing that's the kind of mistake that people tend to make with decks like this is they'll have a number of different things in the deck that want tech, and they're kind of fighting between themselves for it. So, for example, we know with a scrapyard, you want a lot of tech so it can start spitting out all of these Outlander minions. But then also, if you've got Razor Squadron, we know that Razor Squadron is just going to burn through that tech super fast and consume as much as it can whilst it's alive. So those two strats are kind of at odds with each other. So you need to keep that in mind. So really just think about how much tech you're making. Think about what you want to consume. So for example, I want my Rex Walker with gnats. And this is just an example deck here that I just put together just so we could demonstrate some of the stats. So, for example, if you've got, I want my Wrecked Walker with gnats, I also want to have an aimbot with the full buffs. So then you think about, I need this much tech per cycle. And then, because, of course, you don't have to have a full Outlander deck. Only the Outlander cards will count towards the tech. But if you're not going to be consuming too much tech, then you don't necessarily need all Outlander cards. And, of course, then that may free you up with some different deck building strategies. Right, let's have a look at what we've just said and have a look at it in action, and then hopefully the combination of the description and it in action put together will make perfect sense. Let's have a look.
Let's get this duel started.
Okay, so let's have a look at how the tech works and have a look at an example of it. So if we just pause it here, we can see straight away we've got our tech counter here. Remember, that'll only show if we've got tech-enabled cards. And it's telling us that we've got 50 tech. So why do we start with 50 tech? Well, the amount you start with is going to depend on what cards are in your hand to start with. So as a match starts, you will get 4 cards randomly drawn into your hand, and the drawing of those will generate the tech. And of course, remember, 5 mana per tech. So we've got the Wrecked Walker giving us 10 tech, we've got the Marines giving us 15, we've got the Scrapyard giving us 20, and the Disruptor Puff giving us 5. So that's our total of 50. The other thing we can see here is the Wrecked Walker is highlighted in yellow, so that's telling us that it does have a tech trigger ability, and that we do have enough tech to trigger it. The Scrapyard's not highlighted in yellow, but because that doesn't really have a tech trigger ability. It's just, it is what it is. There's no ability to trigger. If we just think about how this is going to work, and if we work through the maths and see if it checks out. So what we're going to do here is we're going to spawn our wrecked walker, which is going to consume our 30 tech. Remember, the tech is consumed automatically, assuming that you have enough. So we're at 50, we're going to consume 30, which takes us down to 20. But of course, when we play the wrecked walker, we're going to draw the next card into that slot, which we can see here is going to be the drone buzzers. And a top tip here for new players is don't just pay attention to your 4 cards, also pay attention to your 5th card. Now, of course, you can't directly play your 5th card, but it's very important to know what it is if you need to quickly cycle to it, for example. So definitely pay attention to that. So we're going to go down to 20 tech, but then we're going to draw the drone buzzers, which are a 4-mana Outlander card. That's going to generate 20 tech, so we should be up to 40. So if we play that through and see what happens, so we're at 50, we should play this and end up at 40. Let's just speed it along a little bit, and then we'll see if it pans out as expected. And there we have it. We played it, and we're at 40 tech. And then as you go through a match, the amount of tech you have is going to change based on how much you're generating and how much you're using. So we don't need to look at the ins and outs of everything of this, but I think it'd be interesting to have a look at the scrapyard, because that's always something that confuses people. And let's have a look here. So we're at, we pause it here, so we're at 160 tech. That's our amount. So that's the amount of tech that the scrapyard has to play with, if you like. And remember, the scrapyard's going to generate these random Outlander ground minions between 2 and 5 mana, and it's going to cost tech to do so at the rate of 13 tech per unit. So let's have a look what we get first. So we're at 160, and then we get a Marine. So as mentioned before, that's the Simulacrum being chosen. And the Simulacrum is a 2-mana card, so it's going to consume 2 times 13, which is 26. And you can see here we've dropped down from 160 to 134. So that checks out. And then as we go on, we're going to get something else. This time it's a Stint. Again, the Stint is a 2-mana card, and it's going to consume again 2 times 13. Now, one thing to notice is that the units that come out of the scrapyard, even if they have a tech-enabled ability like the Stint, we know can grab a bridge, or the Simulacrum with the haste, that will not be triggered. So regardless of how much tech you've got, that will not be triggered. Anything coming out of the scrapyard does not come out with activated abilities, tech-based abilities. And then we'll see what else we're going to get here. And the last thing we get is an Annihilator. So Annihilator is a much more expensive 5-mana unit. So that's going to consume 5 times 13 tech. And you can see now we're down to 43. So we did have enough tech to generate, and we got some reasonable value. Remember, we only paid 4 mana for that scrapyard, but of course we also paid tech as well, which costs us in some way. And that's, I think, is pretty much all that I wanted to show you. We don't need to go really through the ins and outs of all of the different cards and see how they work. We don't need to view that on the screen. But there, hopefully that gives you a great insight into how you generate tech, where you can see your tech balance, if you like, and also what cards have tech-based abilities, and not only how you trigger them, but also how they work. Hopefully this has been a useful video. As I said, a lot of people always ask me about tech, and this video has been a long time coming. Why did I put it off? Who knows? But hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, we're getting close to 2,000 subs here in the Fish Tank, so if you want to keep up to date with all Minion Masters news, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to follow along. And that is pretty much it. Let me know in the comments if I answered the questions you have about tech, or if you have any furthers. That's pretty much it. I'm Fish, and this is an Awkward Wave.